Hi, and welcome to Stereoscopic 3D in Maya, presented by Digital Tutors, an Autodesk authorized publisher. My name is Papa Giorgio, and I'll be your instructor throughout the course of this training as we explore stereoscopic 3D and teach you step by step how to create your own stereo 3D imagery using Maya. Since the 1800s, people have actually been using stereoscopic concepts to create the illusion of depth. They did this by displaying each eye a slightly different image. So when the brain fused those images together, it saw depth. With the help of new technology and those core principles, artists at major studios like DreamWorks, Disney, and Sony are using this to create 3D movies that you see at the theater. We'll start our training by covering the basics of stereo camera rigs and the tools and techniques to putting stereo rendering into place. You'll also learn how zero parallax and interaxial separation play a role in seeing a realistic result, and all the things that you need to take into consideration when working on your own shots. You'll also learn how to generate the rigs and alter them to fit your production pipeline. And we'll spend a lot of time learning how to properly set the values, as well as adding expressions to customize the stereo rig. And finally, you'll learn how to render your stereo images and composite these images back together to see a final effect. As a bonus, we've added a pair of stereo glasses that are anaglyphic in color. You can use these while we're working on the training and help you follow along. So, as you can see, we've got a lot to cover. So let's get started with our first lesson. Hi, in this first lesson, we're going to take a look at how to actually take something in Maya and view it with stereo glasses. Now, I've opened up lesson 2 here, and you can open this up and follow along with me. One of the things that we're going to need for Maya to actually create a stereo image is depth. All right. So when we look at this image, we're viewing this through one camera, and it's on our screen. And so really, how do we see depth? Well, our brain sees depth by going, well, is something smaller or is something bigger? Will that represent if it's further or closer away? Possibly. So in this scene, everything looks like it's right on the screen, and everything looks like it's about the same size. But it's not. There's some kind of tricky things going on here. If I pull back and turn my camera, you'll notice that this is very small, this is normal, and this is very large. And they're also spread apart. So if we move this around, you can see that I've got one in the back, one in the foreground, and one in the midground, and one in the foreground. And so when I view them like this, they look like they're all on the screen and they're all about the same size. So how do we overcome this? How do we use this to our advantage? Well, what we want to do is actually view this image from 2 separate cameras and then let our brain fuse the image together using each eye. Now, there's a number of ways of doing this, and there's a lot of people who've been doing some old school stuff. So let's take a look at some of the older ways of doing it, and then we'll take a look at how we're going to do it. So we'll just go up here first to create cameras, and we'll go down to stereo camera. That's all you have to do to actually go in and create a default camera. And there it is. So I'll just frame this up so we can talk about what we have here. So when you create a stereo camera, you create essentially a stereo paired camera. So you have the center cam, which is your main camera, okay? And so if you're going to animate this, this is the camera that you're going to animate. Now, this is actually composed of 2 cameras, the left eye and the right eye. When we render out these final frames, we can either choose to render each one of these and composite that back together, or render each one of these as 2 separate files and then composite them later on, which we actually have some lessons on how to do that as well. And so what we're going to do is actually go through and take a look at, real quick, what these cameras are made of. So when we go into this camera itself, the center camera, this is where all of the options that we're going to adjust live. However, if I go into one of the other cameras, let's say the right camera, notice that some of these have yellow fields. These yellow fields represent the fact that they are connected automatically to the center cam via an expression. So for example, if I change this near clip plane from point 1 to, let's say, point 2, all of a sudden in my right camera and my left camera, it's been updated to point 2. Now, this kind of concept and this understanding will be really important later when we start to talk about customizing these cameras to pretty much build our own special type of camera with our own settings. All right, so let's go up here and let's view this in stereo. So we're going to go up here to Panels, Stereo, Stereo Camera. And this will pretty much tell the system I want to look through the center camera. Now, if we want to, we can actually go over to Panels, Stereo, and we can open up either the left, so there's the left view. There's the right view, you can see a slight shift, or here's the center. Now, why is the center black? Well, by default, it picks the color black for your background to offer you as much contrast as possible. Now, you can change this. You can say, you know what, I want, under stereo here, I want you to use just your basic color preferences. Okay, well, the basic color is gray, 50% gray, so it'll leave it at gray. Instead, you can actually pick your own color if you want. So if you go to stereo background color, we'll just pick we'll set it back to black. I think that offers the greatest amount of contrast for this particular scene. All right, so if you slip on your glasses, you're not going to see anything, right? And it's kind of like, wait a minute, I made a stereo camera, I'm looking through the camera, it turned black, how come I don't see anything? Well, we have to tell the system, what do you want to preview and how do you want to preview it? So in this instance, we're looking at the center eye. We're looking at through that center camera. There's no stereo effect. Now there's a number of options here, and these are filter types that we can look at. The two main ones that we're going to be working with are anaglyph and luminance anaglyph, so we'll come back and talk about those. The free view, parallel, and crossed are the old school ways of actually doing stereo imagery. So we'll start with parallel. Now what parallel does is says, okay, I'm going to make an image that has the left and right image inside of a white frame. And what this white frame represents right here is if you had a pair of goggles that had, let's say you took a pair of diving goggles or scuba goggles, and you put a separating, let's say a cardboard card or some type of a separator between your left and right eye, and you put that separation right, or that card right here against here, what you're going to have is a wall between each eye. So your left eye will see this image, your right eye will see this image, but your right eye won't catch a little bit of this. Now what we end up doing is tricking the brain into seeing depth because each eye is being fed a separate image, okay? And that's really the basis of stereo imagery. So what we can do is if we don't have any special goggles or equipment, what we could do is then go to crossed. Now what crossed does, it says, okay, take your left eye and look over and see this image. And take your right eye and look over and see this image. And we're going to do that by crossing our eyes. So this image pulls in, this image pulls in, and you'll actually get a third image. So let me move my mouse out of the way. And what we're going to do is stare at the screen and then slowly cross your eyes until you see a third sign right in the middle. And you will actually see that, if you can focus in on it, as depth. Now, there's a major issue with this. It hurts your eyes. So trying to hold on to that third image in here, it's not comfortable, and there's a great deal of strain. And so we're going to be using a few other options. So these two are old school. You can print these out. Don't require a lot of fancy equipment. There's a horizontal interlace and a checkerboard, and these do use special equipment. And so if you have special goggles or equipment that will use a horizontal interlace, and essentially in a horizontal interlace what we have is there's a even and an odd field. So it's on-off or it's off-on. So when you take those two fields, you can separate each of those fields into a left and right image. Okay. And then a checkerboard is essentially the same type of workflow. So what we're actually going to be using is anaglyph. Now, anaglyph is kind of the old school, oh yeah, I've seen this before. When I think of stereo, you think of anaglyph usually. And there's a lot of problems with anaglyph. Obviously, one of the big problems is color, right? And so if you put on your goggles or glasses, you can see that this is pushed back, this is forward, and this is on the screen. But that orange is really hard to see. And so we actually have another option called luminance anaglyph. And that strips out the color and gives you a black and white image. Obviously, black and white is going to be the easiest to work with, but you can't always have black and white movies, so you're going to have to find the even mix. Now, this is great for home viewing, this is great for internet viewing, but what about for theatrical releases? Well, you're not going to be usually using anaglyph for theatrical release. What you're actually going to be using is the render from each camera. So you'll say, hey, give me the left image, give me the right image, okay? And I'm going to take each of those and project them with two different projectors. And normally you're going to use either real 3D or a similarly polarized goggles, which one side is polarized differently than the other, and we can do that all from the hardware, the equipment, not in Maya. So you don't have all that crazy equipment. The easiest way to see the stereo effect is to just use anaglyph. Okay, so we'll be using anaglyph for the rest of this training, mainly because the glasses are inexpensive and you can view it on your screen right away. So that's kind of nice. All right, so in the next lesson, we'll take a look at how do we actually render out these images and what are some of the settings that we're going to need to be conscious of as we pull these images outside of Maya. So now that you've got a simple scene set up and you've got stereo working, let's talk about how do we get these images out of Maya. So in this very basic setting here, what we want to do is take a quick render of this. Okay, so we'll hit the render button and wow, something weird just happened. Let me do it again. So what we have is the system rendered out the right camera, the left camera, and then composited all that back together as one image. And that's really great for preview purposes, but not so great when you're using this in production, mainly because you want to actually generate the left and the right image completely different, and that way if you need to do some color correction, you can. The reason we don't want to color correct this document is we want this green or this cyan and red to be completely separated. And if we go in and color correct this, we may break the stereo effect or the 3D effect. And we don't want to do that. So what we'd want to do is render out the left, render out the right, go into something like Toxic or After Effects or Fusion, and color correct what we want to color correct, and then composite those back together. Okay, to create either the anaglyph or the interlace or whatever you're trying to create for your final output. And we'll talk about more of those here in a second. So let's talk about how do we get these images out of here. So let's open up our render settings and take a look here. If I go in and I just do a batch render, so render, batch render, and give it a second. Let me go to my folder here where my files are going to be stored. And we'll give it a second to render this with Maya software. There is our image, and it's going to be at the root of our stereo project directory here. So if I open up lesson 3, there is my image and F-check, and that is definitely not my stereo effect. So what's going on here? Well, we have a camera issue. We need to tell the system what camera we want to work on. So let me just go back into my stereo folder and delete this image. Okay, and we'll say, all right, if we have a stereo effect or a stereo rig set in, let's scroll down to where it says renderable cameras. And we'll just change this from perspective. And if you look, there's a few options here. So the first option is render out a stereo pair. And what does that do for us? Well, that actually renders out the left and the right completely separate. Okay, so we'll go ahead and choose that. And let's go ahead and hit render. So we'll go up to render, batch render. And we'll give this a second. All right. And what we will generate is a pair of folders here. Now what's unique about this is if you open it up, it's called lesson 3. And if you open up this one, it's called lesson 3. And they're rendered from the left and right camera. The problem is they both have the identical same name. And that's not very good, because when we're looking at this inside of our compositor, we won't know where they live. We'll just see lesson 3 and lesson 3, and that's not good. So let's throw these away and open up these options one more time and say, okay, let's give this a name. So I'm going to hard code in lesson 03 underscore, and what I'm going to do is right click and I'm going to put in insert camera name. Awesome. So now we've got lesson 03 stereo camera right, and we're going to burn that into the name of the file. This is perfect. So now when I render out my stereo pair, which I'll go ahead and do, go render, batch render, I'll actually get two images, not in a directory, but on their own, that actually say lesson 03 and stereo camera left, stereo camera right. So that's great. This is exactly what I'm looking for. All right, let's toss these, and let's add one more. And what if we wanted to actually see the stereo camera? Well, there's an option down here for stereo camera. So if I choose stereo camera and I render now, I'll get one image. And if I double click and open it, this will be the image of what it looks like from the center point. Okay, so this is not a composited image. This is just from the center camera. This is what I'm looking at, and I can double check my animations from here if you need that. So what if you want all three? What if you want your center camera and your left and your right? How do you get that? Well, right now, we can choose one or the other. We can choose stereo pair, or we can choose stereo camera. If I want to add stereo camera and the stereo pair, I just come down to the bottom where it says Add Renderable Camera. It'll open up another option here, and I can choose left or right. Why would I need to do left or right separately? Well, let's say you had an error, and it errored out on frame 50. Well, you can just set this up to the left camera, re-render frame 50 from the left, and be good with it. Since we want the pair, we're going to go ahead and add the pair. All right, so we got both of these. Now when I hit render, batch render, we should get 3 images. All right, so let's open this up, and there we go. So there's our 3 images that it generated for us, the left, the right, left, right, center, all those images. So let's toss these, and let's make one more change to our setup here. I'm going to add a folder so we can keep all of these organized. So I'll just put in rendered images / and then it'll give it the file name and then the camera name. So you could do all of these. In here you could also right click and insert version number, version notes. You can put in the scene name if you want to do render layers or the dates. There's a lot of really cool things that you can insert. Remember to set it to name, number, extension, so you can do a sequence. And I'll just do 2 frames for now, just so we can show you what that looks like. And here's our stereo pair, our center camera. So we're good to go there. And let's just go ahead and render this as a batch render. So what we end up with is a folder that has a folder called rendered images. And inside of here are all of our images that we need. And you can create other folders if you want. There's a lot that you could do with this if you do want to separate these out. So you could do folder name as left or right camera / file name with left or right camera in it. However you want to slice and dice it, that's all available to you to do inside of this output or render settings here. All right, so let's talk about what happens if you want to just take a look at a fast, quick preview. Well, you can hit render one time. You could also just do a play blast. So if your project warrants that you need to do a play blast, let's just open up our time slider here. You can right click, and down at the very bottom of your list is a list here called play blast, and I'll just play blast this. I'll hit escape, and what we'll end up generating is a quick preview of the actual animation or the scene or whatever you're trying to create. The only issue is if you go into the play blast settings, okay, which is the option box, you may want to take the scale from 50% to 1, mainly because you may cause some really weird artifacts. And I actually like using the image viewer so I don't have to deal with Windows Media Player. And so by setting this to image viewer, I'll actually create one image for each frame. And it's very similar to, it essentially is a hardware render. And you can get the very fast playback, very fast preview without having to render out your whole scene. Okay, so all of these could be very, very useful ways of previewing your scene, previewing your effect. Again, when we open up those images, okay, that we rendered, the left and right camera are not going to be anaglyphic. They're not going to be in stereo. because we want to create that stereo effect in something like either Photoshop or After Effects. And so I'll show you how to do those towards the end of this training product. So hopefully this arms you now with kind of a broad overview of the process of actually taking your scene, setting up stereo, hitting the render, and setting up all your render settings. Next, we'll actually talk about essentially what is stereo, kind of visually take a look at that, and then we'll take a look at the different filter types. In this lesson, we're going to learn what stereoscopy is and how it works. Now, there are many different ways that our brain sees depth in a scene, but until stereoscopy, one has been completely closed off to us: stereopsis. While looking at an object, our brain detects the difference between what our two eyes are seeing and then gives us a perception of depth. Now, this process of comparing two images for a depth cue is called stereopsis. Since most displays are a flat 2D plane, our brain uses stereopsis to see that the scene is at a certain uniform depth, or everything is on the screen. When only displaying a single image, like we would on a monitor, we can't trick the brain into thinking that the scene has any depth to it. So stereoscopy tricks our brain by showing one image to the left eye and a completely different image to the right eye. There are two parts to creating a successful stereoscopy effect: creating the left and right image to correctly give a comfortable depth effect, and displaying the two images to our eyes. So we will learn the various methods of getting the correct image to the correct eye in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about the different stereo filter types. Now, stereoscopy works by sending one image to the left eye and an image from a slightly different perspective to the right eye. The simplest way to display these two images is just to put them next to each other, and you use your eyes to trick them into combining. So you have to cross your eyes until the image overlaps on itself and you actually see three images. The 3D effect will be in the center image. This is called cross-convergence viewing. Now, if you keep the two images next to each other and look forward, this is called a parallel pair. And to view a parallel pair, all you need to do is diverge your eyes or make your eyes look at a point in a far, far distance. Now, some people have trouble with both of these viewing methods. Yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable for long periods of time, and it's really only good for very, very limited viewing areas, definitely not like a big theater screen. And since we really can't ask people to sit through an entire movie with their eyes crossed or diverged, heaven's sakes, cross-convergence and parallel viewing is rarely used, but it's really the only ones that don't really require any kind of special equipment or viewing glasses. Another method of getting the specific image to the correct eye is to use shutter glasses. Now, these glasses are powered, and what happens is they close out all of the light to the left eye while the screen is projecting the right image, and then it will flip over. It will close all the light off on the right eye while the left image is being projected. Now, this does result in a full-color stereo effect, but it's got a few downsides. The glasses need to be powered, and so you'll be tethered down somewhere, and they need to get a signal from the projector to stay in sync with all of the images. They're also not cheap to produce, and as a result need to be washed after every screening, so because of these limitations, shutter glasses are rarely used in big productions or really are impractical for home theater use. Now, one filter type that you probably recognize is anaglyph. Anaglyphs are made by taking the red out of the left image and adding it to the blue-green of the right image. When you put on your red cyan glasses, your left eye is only able to see the red light off of that image, and your right eye can only see the blue-green portion of that image. Since we're using red and cyan as the filter, we have a very limited color space, so if we have an overly red object, the left eye will see it fine, but the right eye won't see anything. Now, this breaks the stereo effect, but even with this issue, anaglyph is really the most popular filter type since the glasses are relatively cheap to produce and the images can be seen on pretty much any viewing device, even paper. And because of this, anaglyph is often the type of filter used in home theaters or any type of low-end, low-budget release. If you go see a 3D movie in the theater, it will probably be using some type of a polarized filter or polarized glasses. Now, polarization works by changing the light that is sent from the projector. So, the simplest system that you're going to have is a two-projector system, one for the left eye and one for the right eye. So on each of these, there is a polarizing filter that gets added to the projector itself, and it changes the light to be projected in two different angles. The viewer then actually wears a pair of glasses that also have a polarizing filter, and they actually match the filters that were on the projector. The result is that both eyes see only the specific image being shot out from that projector. Now, there's an issue with what they call linear polarization, which is that if you tilt your head, you will actually lose the effect. They actually fix this by using what's called a circular polarization. It's actually also known as the Real D system. This works by having one set of light be shot out in a clockwise and the other counterclockwise, so no matter how you turn your head, you're always going to get the right image. Polarization is the best filter type, but it does require specialized equipment to display, so it's rarely used outside of movie theaters. You wouldn't be able to have this on your desk, for example. So during this training, we're actually going to use anaglyph to view and work with our stereo system. But we can output these images to really any format for any filter type we need. So the decision on which filter you use is really made at the end of the pipeline, so as long as you keep both the left and right images intact, so let's start using stereo on a specific scene and take a look at some of the production issues that we're going to run into. I'm going to open up Lesson 6 scene file, and it's going to be a scene of our mad scientist. So let's just see what the textures look like. I'm going to hit 5, and there's our textures. And if I go to a lighted mode, all I have in here really is an ambient light that's in the scene. And so if I hit render, I'll actually see this image, and it'll be fairly bright. So everything I need will be in there. We'll give that a second to come in. There we go. So that's what the scene looks like, and I'll just minimize this. I have a graphics card in this system that will actually allow me to preview that light in a high quality mode. So if I change this renderer from default to high quality rendering, we get a little bit of an easier image to look at, an easier image to preview. So you may or may not have that setting. It's fine. If you don't, you'll still get a great rendered result. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is let me jump back over to Wireframe, and I'm going to go ahead and create my stereo camera. So just like we did earlier, create cameras, stereo camera. When you do that, it's going to drop this right here in the at the origin of the scene. So let's just get this moved up and into position. Now, as you can see here, my scene is pretty much just a fake. We just have what we need to pull the shot off, and that's always a good practice. So now let's take a look through the camera. So I'm just going to change this panel to stereo camera. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my filtering, and let's just go ahead and go to high quality. All right, so all I'm really doing is just getting all my scene elements set up. Let's just frame this shot in. There we go. And get to somewhere like this. Okay, so to select the camera or open the attributes, you'll want to go to View, Select Camera, or click this little icon right here, and that will select the camera as well. And in the attribute editor, we've got a number of settings that we're going to work with. Now, the first setting is the type of stereo camera that you want. Normally, if you have this set to converged or parallel, there are very, very specific usages of why you would use that type of a stereo camera setup. Parallel is great for infinite distance, and we actually have a lesson for that. And converged will actually do it kind of an old school way where you actually cross your eyes, you force your eyes to cross. Not great in every instance. You can pull it off in certain things. We're going to be sticking with off axis, which is a newer way of doing stereo, and the results are really, really good. So let's go ahead, crank this over to anaglyph. Okay, I'm just going to pull in a little bit so we can see our scene here. Something like this. And if you slip your glasses on, you will actually see a stereo effect. So you won't see a great stereo effect, but you will see a stereo effect. And what's happening is we haven't really set the zero parallax plane or the correct interaxle separation. So what we have is a number of things that we need to adjust. So let's take a look at this interaxle separation first. It's currently set to 6.35. And what it's normally going to do is try to set it around 6.3, 6.5 centimeters, which is actually 63 or 65 millimeters, which is about the distance between your pupils, adult pupils. Now, these numbers are directly tied to the unit organization of your scene. So if we go up here to Window, Settings and Preferences, open that up there, and we go to Settings, you'll notice that we're currently using centimeters as our working unit. Now, if I change this to something like foot, you'll notice that this will change as well. So all of these are very, very closely tied together and are easy to manipulate. So what we did was we changed this to feet. When we did the render of this, we actually reset this to fit the human eyes based on the size of the guy in our units, and then we switched it back to centimeters. Why switch it back? Well, everything else in Maya is in centimeters, so we don't want to just switch it to control the camera when other things may not work correctly, things like dynamic systems or other systems that we can't control. All right, so now that we have this, let me jump over to my perspective mode, and let's just frame up this camera so I can show you what's going on. So as I adjust this interaxle separation, you will notice that the cameras will come closer or further apart. What these little cameras right here that are in purple represent are your eyes. So these are the two eyes in the scene. The center cam is pretty much saying what would it look like if you were to look through each of the pair of eyes and comp that image back together. Now the zero parallax plane is a very interesting attribute because as I adjust this, you can't see anything that's happening. Okay. However, if I go to converged and I adjust this, you can see exactly what's happening. So as I adjust this number, you can see how those cameras are being pulled inward. Well, if I go back to off axis, I won't see this. And that's because the calculation happens completely different. And so let's take a look at where we do see that. So we'll jump back over into our stereo camera. Wow, there we go. So let's adjust this here. Our interaxle separation adjusts how far apart the eyes are, and the zero parallax controls where the eyes cross. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's just get a setting here that looks pretty good. 1 second. And so what we got here is a scene where, here we go. What we want to do is take the gloves and put those at zero parallax. What is zero parallax? Well, zero parallax is essentially the screen. So think of zero parallax as no depth. It is at the point on the screen where the object is no longer in depth and it's not coming out of depth. It's just at zero. And so things that are behind the object are said to have positive parallax. And that's really easy on your eyes. Things that are in front of the zero parallax, those are going to be negative parallax. And you really want to avoid those. Obviously, all rules are made to be broken, but you'll want to control that. So let's just go ahead and pull these images together, and I'll show you what this can do. So as I'm pulling the gloves, the fingertips together, okay, and I'm really watching this one right here. As I pull that fingertip together, you notice now, if you slip your glasses on, you're going to see an effect that looks a little bit more realistic. So now the liquid is coming out of the scene. If I was to take this and continue cranking this over, okay, and so I'll crank this to where the liquid is as close as we can to get to zero parallax. Let's see. Something like this. You'll notice now the liquid is on the screen and everybody else is behind it. The wall is behind it, the scientist behind it, and it really pulls off the effect. So really those are two things that you'll really want to work with and control. And over the course of the lessons, we're actually going to really spend a lot of time getting all of the different settings in place so we can really control what we're looking at and try to do it more than just fudging some numbers around. In this lesson, we're going to learn some of the rules of stereoscopy to create an enjoyable viewing experience. Now, because stereoscopy tricks your eyes to move with two separate images, it's possible to create stereo images that can cause headaches, or even worse, nausea. Now, these problems only occur if the stereo effect is too strong, and the most important value to set correctly is the distance between the two cameras, also known as the interaxial separation. While looking around in the real world, the furthest our eyes ever go apart is when we stare at something very far away. When we do this, our eyes become parallel, but it's possible for a bad stereo image to try to cause our eyes to diverge or point further away from each other. Now, our muscles are not used to doing this, and it causes headaches and general discomfort beyond just breaking the stereo effect that you've spent so much time building. Since adult eyes are usually about 65 millimeters apart, we need to make sure that our final image never has more than that amount of separation between the red and the blue images. Now, this is only an issue with things very far away from the depth of the screen, and it's because the left image is on the left and the right image is on the right. Maya's default separation is 6.5 centimeters or 65 millimeters. But you need to keep in mind how large of a screen this is going to be projected on. Now, how close the viewer will be and the screen and the total depth of your scene, these are all factors that you're going to have to consider. If you only have a single object in front of a blurry background, you can increase the separation, but because the scene has a shallow depth. Now, on the other hand, if you have a long landscape scene, you'll need to be careful of too much separation at the furthest point, and keeping all these factors in mind will help you decide what a good maximum interaxial separation is for your own particular scene. We run into a similar but less damaging problem when an object is too far in front of the zero parallax point. So our eyes have to cross slightly to see the negative parallax of an object coming out of the screen. But the object comes too close to our eyes will have to cross way too far and we'll lose the stereo effect. So since our eyes naturally cross when we're looking at something close, this doesn't really cause as much discomfort or as divergence does, but however, it will break the stereo effect and make our viewers unable to fuse that scene into a coherent image, which will then kick them out of the experience and go against what we've been trying to build. A good rule of thumb is that no object should be closer to the camera than half the distance to the zero parallax plane. This also depends on the separation between the images. So this would be another instance where you might need to lower your interaxial separation. Now, one last thing we have to keep in mind is the framing of our scene or shot. Because we're using two cameras, objects could be cut off by the edge of the screen at various different points. So it's always better to not have any focal object that's going to break the frame of a shot. And, inevitably, the background elements will need to go up to the edge. I mean, this won't cause issues unless you direct the viewer to that side of the edge. Now, having things pop out of the screen and partially off frame is the most jarring, since your brain can't fuse what the edge would look like on the screen while the majority of the object is close to you. So, by keeping in mind the maximum separation for both objects, very far away and very close, we can really start to create an enjoyable stereo viewing experience that will keep the viewer immersed throughout the entire project or film. So now that you know some of the base rules of stereoscopy, let's take a look at how we can use some of the built-in guides inside of Maya to really help you visualize your stereo output and what you're going to be working with. Now, I'm going to continue with the file that we were working with earlier, or you can open up Lesson 8, which is in your Scenes directory. What I want to do is start to control where my cameras are looking, and right now it's very difficult to see. So what I'd like to do is come down here where it says Stereo Display Controls. We'll open that up, and we have a few things that we can use to help us visualize what's going on. Now, the near clip and the far clip, these are actually controlled right up here at the top with the near clip and far clip plane, and we'll use those later to help us visualize a safe distance. But instead, what we're going to do is focus on this display frustum. Now, if I change this to center, what you're going to see is pretty much where the camera is viewing. So if I hit render, you'll notice that we actually break one of the rules of stereoscopy in that some of the information is cut off. And we don't want to do that because it's going to be very difficult. Now, I could get away with this because the top part being cut off, we will still get a stereo effect. If you slip on your glasses, it'll still work. It won't be great, but it'll still work. Now, if the edges were cut off, that's not good. So, in this scene, how do we use this information to control what we're looking at? So let me jump over to perspective so you can see what's happening. And I'll just go ahead and shade this as well and light it. Okay. So let's take a look at these cameras. Now what I'm looking at here is the center frustum. Okay, this right here. Actually, I think it is easier to see this in wireframe. All right. So that line right there represents the center camera and what it sees. That's not really what I need. I want to see what do the left and right eyes see, or the left and right cameras see. So if we change this from center to left and right, this gives us a lot of information, because what's happening is the camera is saying, okay, here's what this camera sees, and here's what this camera sees. And if you want to see individual cameras, you can. So here's the left, and here's the right. And here they are comped together. The problem is I really want this overlapping area. So this little area right here, that's the area that will be seen by both eyes, thus rendered. And that's what's important to me. So if I change this just to center, I don't really see that. I just see kind of what the camera sees. So a great thing that we can turn on is this option down here called Safe Viewing Volume. Okay, so if I turn this on, you'll notice that I see this blue volume, and it's blue because we've got this colored to blue, so you can set this to whatever you want color-wise. All right, so here's my volume that I'm working with. Well, that volume is actually being calculated by, let me switch these from center to left and right. You can see exactly where this volume is being connected. So if I increase the separation, watch, my volume changes, as it should. So let's take a look. If we just set this to center, now I have the best of everything. I can see exactly what's going to be rendered, and I can also see where my safe volume is going to be. Why would I need this? Well, what if I was to move my camera to something like this, and I didn't have this volume turned on, and I didn't have my frustum turned on? Well, it's going to be very difficult to find out if something is being cut off. And what you end up having to do is look through the camera, double check, well, is that a framing issue, or am I not even in my volume? It's hard to tell. And if I just turn on the volume, you can kind of make it out, but not great. So I'll go ahead and turn on my center frustum, and I'll turn on my safe viewing volume, and I'm going to go back to my perspective mode and say, okay, now let's take a look at this camera and what's being outside the volume. So if I increase the transparency, you can see, all right, everything that is poking out is no longer in the volume. So knowing that, I need to actually move this over and move this back to encompass everything that I want in this particular volume. And so now I'm actually using some visualization tools to help me. All right, so I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. And there we go. Now, I usually turn this on and off. It just depends, do I need it, do I not? I usually leave my center frustum on just so I can kind of guesstimate where this is going to be. But again, you can turn this on and off as you see fit on what you need it to do. The other issue that I want to show you, or the other visualization tool that we want to use to deal with some of our issues, is this zero parallax plane. So in the previous couple lessons, we talked about some of these rules and how to control the zero parallax just by adjusting this slider. Well, yeah, that's fine. You can eyeball it. But if I turn on this zero parallax plane, there it is right there. That represents the screen. And the cup is coming in front of the screen, so it looks like it's going to pop out of the screen. And then the mad scientist is behind the screen, so he's going to feel like he's behind or in depth. So how do we control this? Well, by adjusting this zero parallax option, we can control what is or isn't on the screen. So if I put it right at his fingertips like this, okay, I'll just adjust this back a little bit, and we'll look through the stereo camera. The problem is, as I'm trying to visualize this, I'm going to have to hit render to see this. So we'll give that a second to re-render. All right, and if you slip on your glasses, you'll actually see that the fingertips are at the screen and then the liquid is coming out, which is perfect, but you can't visualize it here. And that's because this zero parallax plane has a tint to it, and it picks red of all colors, so let's go ahead and deal with that first. What I like to do is actually take this, and instead of leaving it red, I just turn the transparency all the way off. If I turn the transparency all the way off, I actually keep the little box that represents where the zero parallax plane is, so I can still kind of visualize where this is. So if I move this forward, let's say, and I put it right at the rim of the cup, I can turn it on and previs this, but I can also use just that little outline to previs it as well. So if I jump back over to my stereo camera and take a render of this, you'll see a completely different image now, because what we're going to have is the liquid on the screen and the mad scientist pushed back into depth. So really a great way to control each of these elements, and we're going to add onto these controls and customize these controls, but basically this is the two things that we're going to be using quite a bit of. Showing our volume, where is it safe to put objects in, and where in space is the screen. Where is the zero parallax point? So now that we've created a basic system where we can view our zero parallax plane, what we want to do is use a little bit of expression work to create a safe distance feedback system. So what I'm trying to create here is a volume that is really a little bit more accurate than what we're getting right now, because this looks like it's pretty good, and if I turn on my safe viewing volume and I move this camera forward, this liquid is still in the volume. Right? Everything looks fine. However, let me turn this off. If I view my camera and I hit render, what's really going to happen is this object is so close to the camera, yet we don't know that. It's going to create a very difficult situation in our brain to fuse this image back together. Okay, so if you slip your glasses on, you can kind of see that the liquid in front, it's very difficult to figure out, is it coming at us or is it on the screen, or kind of what's happening with our scene here. Well, we need to establish some rules, some mathematical rules here. And the way that we want to control this is to use an expression. Now the rule is this zero parallax plane and this camera. Half the distance between the two is the plane where you should put nothing in front of. And so we can use some of the other tools inside of Maya to control this volume. All right, so let's turn on our safe viewing volume, and let's take a look at one of the adjustments that we can make here. We have a near clipping plane, and essentially, if you don't know what a clipping plane is, it tells the camera anything in front of this object. So if the plane was right here, anything in front, don't render. Pretty much cut it off. So if I make an adjustment here to something like this, although that looks fine, if I move this and go back into my stereo camera, you'll notice that the liquid is actually cut out. So the system itself goes, oh, that's cut out, cut it out. We don't need to see it. We don't need to render it. So very, very interesting and a neat way to utilize a tool to help us control what's going on. So again, if I move this back and forth, we get some variable results here depending on where the near plane is. The problem is we can't mathematically go in there and remember, well, we could, but it'd be a lot of hassle to remember to set that to half the zero parallax plane. So it would be easy if our zero parallax plane is at 50, we can say, okay, perfect, set this to 25, and our rule holds. The problem is when we're experimenting and we're just trying to get the right look, and we say, okay, that's perfect, let me just move it to right about here. Now we have to figure out what's half of that. And so it doesn't become a very efficient workflow. So what we're going to do is say, all right, since we know what we want, let's write an expression to control it. So on my center camera, I'm going to right-click the near clip plane, and I'm going to say Create Expression. And that'll open up our expression editor window. Now, it's already pre-selected a few things for us. It's pre-selected the stereo camera center cam shape node, as well as the near clip plane attribute. So all I have to do is highlight all of this information, copy it, come down into my expression and hit paste. I'll hit the space bar, I'll hit equals, space, and paste again. So what did I set this expression to do? I said, all right, find out or set the near clip plane to the near clip plane. So I'm pretty much saying whatever you are, stay there. All right, let's give this a name. We'll call this safe distance. And I'm just going to hit create and close. So what did this do? Well, if I set this to 8, it'll be whatever it is right now. So I can't change it. What I do know is I want it to be related to this zero parallax plane. So let's make an adjustment here. I'll go to Edit Expression, and instead of setting the near clip plane to the near clip plane, I actually want to set it to the zero parallax. And so it's typed in just like this, lowercase 0, 0, capital P, parallax. Okay, great. So we'll just hit Edit and close. Now if you take a look, our near plane is gone. Well, not really. It's actually just being reset to the zero parallax plane. So if I change this zero parallax to something greater or smaller, you notice how this number updates automatically as well. So perfect, we're really making some headway. The problem is I don't want the near plane at the zero parallax plane. I actually want it half the distance between this and the camera. So we know if we set this zero parallax to 0, actually let me set this back to just short of 0, so something like this. So we know we're getting closer and closer and closer to the camera. So we know near 0 is the camera. So what we could do is use that information and say, okay, perfect. Let's set this near clip plane half the distance of the zero parallax plane. So let's edit the expression. And to do half the distance, it's really simple. We're just going to put a slash for divided and put in a 2. So now that we have all of this typed in, all we have to do is hit Edit, close, and now we have a great visualization tool to help us see exactly where this clipping plane effect is happening. So that's pretty cool. What we now need to do is say, all right, since we know this is working for us, let's take a quick render. So I'll just jump over here to my camera. It is cut off, so we can move this back if we want, and it's not cut off, or we can, once we move forward and we're no longer in the safe zone, you can see how that breaks the object. Well, that's great for previewing, okay? But if I hit render, the issue is going to be I'm going to see that cutout. So great for preview, not so great for rendering, and we need to control this. Well, what's happening is each of the cameras in our system are being controlled by the center cam. So in our camera setup here, the center cam drives all the shots. That's the one we're making adjustments on. And those adjustments are being fed down to each of the left and right stereo cameras. So what I need to do is remove this near clip plane. So I'll just right click and say break connection on that near clip plane. Okay. And I'm going to set this near clip plane to 0.1. And I'm going to do the same on the other camera. So we'll say break connection, and we'll set that to 0.1. And what we end up with is on the center cam, it's still being affected. Okay, so our display frustum, we'll just go ahead and turn that off. We still see it. Okay, so even if I turn that on and off, we'll still see that something's not working right. Well, I'll just turn off the safe viewing volume and say, okay, let's preview this. So now it's very difficult to see exactly where this break is happening. However, if I go into my perspective and I turn on my display near clip for the center, there it is. And so I have created myself a really cool visualization tool to help us really iron out exactly what's happening in our scene and what is going to be safe and what's not going to be safe. Having this tool will really help us figure out if we're really setting up a really nice viewing experience, or are we just putting it together and hoping it's a very nice viewing experience. So again, gives us a little bit of control, and if we know that we want this object, like the fingers, to be at zero parallax, but this is not working out, we would then need to adjust that zero parallax amount. Okay, so either we need to make it larger and then pull the camera back, or we would have to move it forward and tighten up the separation. So it's a really neat setup. Again, you don't have to do it, but visualizing this makes it really, really easy. In this lesson, we're going to explore the different types of cameras, and we'll start with converged. So all of this time, we've been using off-axis as our main camera type. And again, that's a modern way of doing stereo type of imagery. It's great. It's gonna, it's pretty much the way our eyes work, so it's going to be a solid workflow. If you need to, and I want to show you this so you can kind of learn how to use it, but learn why not to use it, you could shift this over to converged. Now, I don't recommend converged because what it has to do, and you just see the camera shift there. Let me take it back to off axis. You can see him shift. The cameras actually rotate to help you iron out exactly where your zero parallax is, and that is very similar to your eyes crossing to create an image. The problem is we create a lot of keystone effects and a lot of distortion. So let's take a look here through our scene. And as I adjust my zero parallax, and hopefully get not too much here. Here we go. You can see right here that there's a couple of really bad issues going on. Okay, first issue that we want to deal with, let me just minimize this here. First issue that we want to deal with is that this point and this red point, they are not on the same plane here, okay, or the same grid line. And it's because the red is a little bit higher. Why is it doing that? Well, as it's rotating these cameras, okay, let me turn on their frusтрums here, 1 second. I'll just turn on all of them so you can see what's going on here. Okay, so we're looking at the cameras. Here is the right, the left, the center, and they're all crossing at different points. And that's because each of them are rotated in. Instead of like our eyes looking straight ahead, these are actually crossing. And that crossing is causing the system to, or the cameras, to display this vertical disparity or vertical difference. And so what's happening is this red layer or this red camera is higher than the green. And when this happens, our camera, or our eyes, has a very difficult time fusing this image together. It's very, very hard to fix these types of images and posts because you actually have a size difference. You have a major keystoning effect that's happening. So when could you use it? Well, I mean, you shouldn't, but if you had to, you could put things right in the center of your scene, and usually you could get away with it. Okay, but even here, you can see how much of a difference this is causing, just even on kind of the bowl end of this beaker. Okay, so let me adjust my zero parallax here, and I'll reduce my separation. Okay, so if your numbers are really, really small, you might get away with it. But usually you don't want to rotate the cameras, okay? So we'll stick with off axes. Now, as soon as I did that, I went from converged, if you look at this corner up here, to off axes. I lost all that. So what's happening here is because my eyes are at fixed spots and not rotating, they're going to be cropped at the exact same point, and they're sharing the outer bound corners where the frustrum and the safe volume is. All right, so how do we use this information? What if we want to toe in the cameras just a bit? Well, you shouldn't, but if you need to, for whatever reason, there is a manual control under the stereo adjustments. So if you twirl that down, there is a toe-in adjustment. And if you adjust this, you can manually create that effect. Okay, so let's see if we can make an adjustment here. Okay, and then we might want to toe in this effect to pull this together. There we go. So you can see here how we can really shift this. I'm just not a big fan of making adjustments by adjusting the toe. You normally don't want to do that. It's just putting you in a very dangerous situation of having to deal with items and posts that are now two totally different sizes. So you really want to be careful of adjusting this toe in. Now, a worst case scenario is something is cut off on the side of your screen. So maybe part of his finger is cut off, and you need to get just a little bit of this moved back. What you have here is this film offset. So if you need to get, I'm going to hold down Control and click and drag. If you need to manually pull this over, you can. But remember, this is going to affect now your zero parallax and separation. So you have to know that you're taking control over this and moving this manually. But that might help you get your shot rendered, and then you could put it back together correctly inside of your compositor. Okay, so you can do either the right camera or the left camera. So depending on if you need to move the red image or the blue-green image, you have that ability to go in and manually move it, render, and then put it back together inside of your compositor. So just be aware that, anytime you make adjustments to these, you're overriding the basic rig that's been set up. And all three of these options, but both of these, mainly the toe in or the offsetting, should be kind of your last resort. Hey, I need to tweak this to get all of this in frame, with toe in being your worst case scenario. Now, there is one more type called a parallel stereotype, and we'll talk about that next in the next lesson and how we would use that in a particular scene. So now that we've talked about converged, let's take a few minutes to talk about parallel. So I've got lesson 11 opened up as my scene file, and what we've got here is an island, pretty much a little volcano, and I want to now create a stereo effect. But the problem is, in real life, our eyes can only see about 200 meters as far as depth goes. After 200 meters, it just becomes pretty much like cardboard cutouts. And in this scene, we've got a regular off-axis camera. Okay, so if you slip on your glasses and take a look, it looks 3D, but it could be better, right? There could be a little bit of a better effect. So let's take a look at our scene here. And I'm going to just go in and select my camera. And I've got this set to off-axis. Now I'm going to just use my channel box here and see how much of this I can do in my channel box. So what can I do? Well, I can adjust this zero parallax to something crazy, like 1,000. And that might help a little bit, but now I've lost a lot of my separation, so then I have to crank up my separation. So this back and forth for things that have this huge distance, it's not the way to go. An easier way to work is to take this stereo from off-axis down to parallel. Now by setting this to parallel, my zero parallax has no effect anymore. What I'm going to do is essentially control everything with this inner axle separation. So if I set this to something like 500 and put on your glasses, you can actually start to see a very good effect. Let's change this to 1,000. All right, that looks really cool. So now you can actually see some really nice depth happening here. So what happens when you have to have, let's say, a boat that drives through? We've got a real issue there. So what we want to do is render this out by itself, and then render the boat and control the boat separately from this background element, mainly because this thing is so far away that we've had to separate our eyes 1,000 centimeters away to make this work. Well, obviously we don't have heads that big, so that's not going to work. But to get the right look, we've had to break the rules and make this adjustment. So remember, all of these rules are so you know how to break them and what they're for and what your artistic vision is. In our instance, we want to have some nice depth along here, along this ridge line, and we were not going to get that with off-axis. And so things that are this far away, parallel is the way to go. So wanted to show you that. Normally, off-axis is going to take care of everything for you because, it's kind of the modern way of doing it, and everything you need is tucked away inside of that camera type. So now that we've had a chance to go through a lot of the settings and understand how stereo works inside of Maya, let's talk about how do we customize our experience, especially when you're doing a lot of work for a number of shots. One of the things that I want to show you is how to access other camera rigs inside of Maya. Now, all this time, when you go to Create Cameras, there's just one stereo camera rig, okay? And that's the standard rig that we've been using, 3-camera setup. And this is a really good setup. It does a lot of the things that we need it to do, so we're good to go there. What we want to do is access some of the other available rigs to us. And so what we need to do is kind of troll around some of these directories. So I'm going to go into the Maya 2009 install directory, and I'm going to go down to Python. I'll go to the library, the lib, site packages, Maya, and then we'll go into the app, the app, and then there's a folder for stereo. So we'll just open up stereo. Now, if you take a look here, here's our default rig. But if you look, there's also a complex rig, there's a simple rig, there's a number of things here. And eventually, we're going to teach you how to make your own special rig. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to actually copy the name of this, which is stereo camera complex rig.py. I don't need the .py, I just need the name of this file. Okay. And now let's go back into Maya and see how do we load that complex rig. So what we'll do is we'll go to Window, Rendering Editors, over to the Custom Stereo Rig Editor. And what this is going to do is open up the ability for us to add that or call that script and add it to our menu. So the way we'll do that is we'll type in maya.app.stereo. That is the exact same information that's right here. So maya.app.stereo. Okay. And then we'll put in the name of the rig that we want and then .create. So let's go ahead and put that in right here. Create procedure. It's going to be maya.app.stereo, which is the path of where this file is. We'll put in the name of or paste in the name of the script that we want to run, and we'll say .create rig. All right. We need to give it a name, so I'm going to call this my complex stereo setup, okay, or rig, or whatever you want to call it. And I'll say add new rig. Now, it added this here, so if I want to get rid of it, I can hit the trash can. But if I look in my scene, I don't have a rig. Well, what this did was it just added the menu option to add more rigs. So let's go up here to Create, Cameras, and if you look now, I have 2 options. And there's my complex stereo setup. So if I click this, I'm actually going to get a 7-camera rig, which is pretty cool, okay? And essentially what I have is one rig or one camera that I can use to animate and set up, and then I have lots of individual pairs that I could work with. Now, all of these are being controlled by this center rig. So if I adjust, let's say, the inner axle separation, I adjust all of them. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Now remember, if I want to render, let's say this one, and this one, and this one, no problem. All I have to do is go into my render settings. Remember, when we scroll down to the renderable cameras, we'll just choose Add Renderable Camera, and we can add as many of these as we need, and then we can go through and pick the ones that we want. So we'll say we'll take the multi-left one, and we'll take the multi-right one. That will create a stereo pair. We can take the multi-left 2 and the multi-left right, right 2, and that'll create that pair. And so you can go through and add as many of these as you want. And when you hit render, remember to put in the camera name, and it will spit out everything you need to do. Okay, so I'll just move this over. Now there's a few more that we can access. One is a hierarchical setup, and one's a very simple setup. So let's create those. Now you could keep typing in those things, or we can use a little bit of code and pull them all up. So in your online help, if you open up right here where it says show hide technical documentation, there's one for Python commands, which is this right here. So I'm just going to type in stereo, and there it is, stereo rig manager. We'll go ahead and click that. And this tells you all about the stereo rig manager and what it does, but down at the bottom there's some example code that we could use. And most importantly, what I want is just these few lines right here that's in orange, okay? I want this area here where it says register a new rig. That's perfect. I'm looking for that. That'd be great. I need to actually tell the system to load the camera plugin. I need to tell it to install all of the rig managers as well as import the Maya commands. So I'm going to highlight all of this. Okay, right click and copy. I'll go back into Maya, and in my script editor, I will go to the Python tab, make sure it's the Python tab. We'll right click and then we'll come down to paste. All right, so with that done, let's see. I don't need this middle line right here, line 11. I don't really need that because I've already created the complex rig. So I'll just get rid of that line by hitting delete. All right, we'll select everything, hit the enter on the number pad, and I've just executed 2 more camera types. So if we look at this code, we have a stereo hierarchical rig, and then we have a simple rig. All right, let's take a look. If I go to create cameras, wow, look at that. I have a whole bunch of new cameras that I can work with. So under stereo camera, I've got this hierarchical rig. If I open that, it's going to be a 10 camera rig. Now what's unique about this 10 camera rig is that the main camera does not have the inner axle separation or any of the stereo information. It's just going to handle our animation. But each of these pairs has its own unique set of stereo attributes. So essentially, I have 3 stereo cameras that are all connected to one camera, which is awesome. This is going to give me a lot of control as I'm building very, very complex setups. Remember, I can pick these up and move these wherever I want. Okay, I can go with different angles. I can go with different shots. I can get a lot of stuff done. Okay, something like this. But all I have to do is animate this camera and look through it to line everything up. So this is a really, really complex camera that you could use for various productions, and you don't even have to use them with just stereo. You can separate out the cameras and use the center cams as well. All right, now let's talk about the simple camera. So under cameras, if you go to the very last option, which is stereo simple, you can pull this up, and this is about as simple as you get. You really have just 2 cameras, and you're going to control the inner axle separation by actually picking this camera up and moving it. So by moving it left and right, you will adjust the overall inner axle separation. So let me just create an object here for us to look at. I'll go to a NURB sphere out here. Okay, and what we're going to do is view this through these cameras. So this is simple 1. We'll just go to Panels, Stereo, and we'll look through Simple 1. Now what's nice about, even though we only have 2 cameras, is if we look through Simple 1, we will actually see a stereo effect. Okay, so let's just smooth this, and I'll just turn off my grid. So why is this so close? Well, it's all being connected by this camera. So it's translate X is what I'm looking at. I'll just leave that selected. I'll say stereo simple camera 1, and I'll adjust this X position. Now let's see, maybe if I put in -4, that's too much. Let's try 2. Okay, so if you were to put on your glasses, you should actually see that pop out of your screen. And if you had another object, you would see that in relation as well. So very, very useful. Actually, I crossed those, so let me just pull these back very tightly. So something like this. And that's how we're going to control our inner axle separation. So you don't have the zero parallax plane and other cool tools. So in the next few lessons, we're going to talk about how do we make our own custom camera and add that to our shelf, so then every time we need a rig, we can just grab this and go with it. The challenge is going to be every time I open up Maya, if I close Maya and open Maya, this stereo rig editor is going to be blank. Okay, it only does this while you're working. So if you don't need any of these, let's say we want to get rid of the bottom 2, all you do is hit those trash cans, and now if you go to create cameras, those 2 are gone. If I want to get rid of this complex rig, I can get rid of that as well, and I'm now back to just my default. So very, very useful to create your own rigs. I'm going to show you now how to edit these files and these Python scripts to really take control over the rigs themselves. So in the next few lessons, I want to walk you through the process of creating your own custom rig and setting all of the defaults and settings that you need to execute this camera every time you need to execute a 3D stereo camera. So for example, in this file, which is lesson 13, we had a bunch of things that we set up on this camera rig. We set up the zero parallax, we turned it on, we set the transparency to 0, we built this kind of custom near plane guide to help us see our volume, where's a good safe volume and where's it a bad volume. And so there's a lot of stuff that we did. We tied all this together with expressions, and now we want to connect all of this back together as our own custom rig. So when next time I load it, it's got all these settings ready to go. How do we do that? Well, we're going to have to go back into our Python folder. So I'm going to jump back into the Python directory that we were working with, and remember, it's going to be Python, library, lib, site packages, Maya, app, stereo is the path, and it's the same one that we used in the previous lesson. And what I'm going to look for is the stereo camera default. There it is, stereo camera default rig.py. So I'm going to take that and copy it and paste it, and there it is right here. And I'm going to rename everything but the .py. Okay, so I'm going to rename this to stereo, capital R rig, capital D, capital T. So stereo rig DT. So this is going to be really important that I remember exactly what I named this, because that's how I'm going to pull it. All right, so if I right click, I can choose a number of things that I can open this with. If I say choose program, I can actually come in and pick what I want to open it with. You're going to want to use something like Notepad. I'm going to be using Edit Plus. You want to use something that is a very, very simple text editor. You don't want to use Microsoft Word or WordPad or something like that. All right, so if we take a look here, we've got some crazy things happening in here. Essentially what we're doing is building our camera rigs inside of Python. So we're importing Maya commands. We have some declarations for building the slave and master cameras. Where we're going to be spending our time is down here under the definition create rig. And in here we've got all kinds of cool attributes that we're going to be working with, and setting up all of our attributes to work back and forth, as well as writing expressions. So now that we've got this file made, let's just make sure that it works. So I'll just close this, minimize, come back into Maya. Okay, I'm just going to go to wireframe to see this. We'll go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Rendering Editors, Custom Stereo Rig Editor. Okay, we'll go ahead and pull that up. And now I need to load this. So we're going to use the same one that we have right here in this create procedure. It's going to be maya.app.stereo. And then the name of our rig that we made. Okay, so let's type this in. Maya.app.stereo. And the name of our rig is going to be stereo, capital R rig, capital D, capital T, period, create rig. Now create rig is just the command that tells the system what you want to do. Okay, and now we're going to give it a name. We're going to call this our custom DT rig. Okay, we'll say add new rig, no problem. And let's just make sure that this works. What we don't want to do is get too much work done and then figure out, wow, what's wrong? So, yep, there we are, perfect. Stereo camera custom DT rig. We'll select it, and there we go. So there's our default setup. Let's just frame this in. And you'll notice that nothing is turned on, so we've got a lot of work to do to get this rig where we want it. But the key step here was we now know that that file works. So everything that we've done so far, we know it works, and now we're ready to start editing. Now that we know that our script is working, what we'd like to do is go in and start to modify some of our settings. So let's take a look. Inside of Maya, I'm going to have my text file opened here. So let's just open this back up. We're going to go into our stereo, and we're going to open up the stereo rig DT. All right. And these methods that are created here are great starting points for what we want to do. So the first thing that we want to do is turn off the near plane. Remember on the left and right cameras? So let's come down here. Let's see. If you look at this code and you see the left cam and right cam is done from this create slave camera. Let's go up here and find out where that is. So create frustum. Here is our method create slave camera. So we know this is where the camera is being built. Well, if we look right here, you'll notice there's a near clip plane. Why do we want to change this? Well, let's go back over here to Maya and let's take a look. So even though we made this custom setting, go to the attribute editor, you'll notice that the near clip plane is locked down. And same on this side. So let's throw away this camera and let's go back into our code and let's delete this line. Okay, and I'm going to delete all the spaces and line up far clip plane just like that. All right, I'll do a file save and we'll just jump over here, run it again, and we're going to run into something very strange. So I just saved it, ran it again, opened it, and wait a minute, they're still locked. Well, the reason being, whenever I ran this script, it's already loaded it in memory. So even though I've modified this script, Maya doesn't know I've modified it. It won't know. And even if I try to reload it, it will say, oh, I already know what this is, and it won't reload it. So we'll do a file, save as, okay, and in that stereo, we're going to put a 2 in there. So I just want to double check my path. Yep, it's good. We'll put in a 2, and this is going to be a Python script, so we'll leave it just like this, and we'll say save. All right, perfect. So now in our window, rendering editors, custom stereo rig editor, let's put in a 2, since this is our number 2, and we'll just hit enter. Now by doing this, here's what we get. I'll throw away the old one, I'll bring in this again, and now our right and left cameras are no longer connected to the near clip plane. So that's perfect. We can now start to look at things like our zero parallax. So in what we had attributed earlier was when we built this, we turned on our zero parallax plane and we set the transparency to 0. Well, by doing this, what I can do is open up my script editor and take a look at the code that did just that for me. Okay, so we have a set attribute, set adder, and it's going to be a, let me just zoom this in for you a little bit. It's going to be the name of the center camera, zero parallax plane, and we got it set to 1. Okay, so let's take a look at this. If we copy this zero parallax plane part, I'll just copy that, and now let's go into our code and figure out where we can use this. So we're going to scroll all the way down and we're going to try to find where it says this create rig. We want to look for where it creates the center camera. And there's some set attributes here as well. And I'm just going to go towards the bottom and you can see here there's a number of set attributes. Okay, so here is one right here. So what we're going to do is create the left and right camera and set some attributes. So I'm going to set mine way down here at the bottom after it's already done everything it needs to do. Okay, so I'm just going to press enter, and if I put in a pound sign, this pound sign or number sign, it's pretty much a comment. So I'm going to say DT custom additions. Okay, and I'm just going to put one here, and that just makes it a nice little line break. Okay. Oops. All right, so I'm going to enter a few times and I'm going to add in my code. So I'm going to paste this in. Zero parallax plane. That's what I want to add. Where do I add that? Well, here's a command, set adder. That's cool. We recognize that. And then we're setting some attributes. So let's copy one of these lines. Control C, and we'll come down here and paste this in. And I'm going to remove this left cam attribute with something else. What do I need? Well, let's look up here. We need to know the name of this camera. So in this instance, it was called Stereo Camera 1 Center Cam Shape. Well, if I make another camera, it's going to be called stereo camera 2 center cam shape, and that's not good. That's not going to help me find out which camera to set this on. So I'm going to look for something where I'm creating the camera. So here we go. I've got a name, root name, camera shape, center cam shape, which is perfect. That's exactly the object I'm looking for. So by identifying where this is, we now know the variable that this is all being called. So center cam is the name of our camera. So let's come back down where we were working, and we'll put in center cam. Okay, and we're going to say plus, and we don't need this period or attribute. We're going to put in this dot zero parallax plane. So I'll cut that, and I'll put that in right here in front of the comma. And we do need one more single quote, so we'll just put that in. And now we need to know what is the attribute that we want. Well, if we look in Maya, the attribute was set to 1. So we'll set the same thing here in Edit Plus. We'll just highlight everything here where it says lock equals true, and we'll just set this to the number 1. Now let's do a save as, file, save as. I'm going to make sure that this is a Python script, and we'll call this number 3. Now, by doing this, we're going to have an error, right? And I'll show you where the error will occur. So I'll take this camera, I'll throw it away, and we'll go into our rendering editors, our custom stereo rig editor. We're going to load up number 3, hit enter, no problem. It doesn't give you an error. It doesn't give you an error until you go to create it. Now watch, when I go to create it, oh, I get this mean error. It says, I don't know what you're trying to do. Well, let's take a look. The way Python does its organization and its encapsulation is with spaces. And so all of these are double space, so I need to put in 2 spaces. Just by doing that, watch, I'll hit save. I'll go back into Maya. We will reload this. So I'll just hit enter to reload this, and we'll launch this again. Perfect, no problem. And this time, if you take a look, it turned on our zero parallax plane. So now what I want to do is I want to turn off the transparency or set it to 0. So I'll crank this down. We'll go to our script editor, and we'll take a look at the code that it just ran. So the code is going to be .0 parallax transparency is set to 0. So I'll copy this part. We'll go back into our code, and this is the part that I want to make a duplicate of. So I'll just paste in my little attribute there, and let's see, we'll copy this, paste another one in, cut this since that's the part I want to control, and I'll just paste that right in. Okay, and instead of 1, we want to set it to 0. So really what I'm doing is I'm using kind of all of the things that I can have access to help me write my scripts. Right? We'll do a file, and we'll do a save as. Let's see, save as. We're going to give this a 4. Okay, and now let's jump back over to Maya, and let's delete this camera, and let's see what we get. We should go and load this up. Window, rendering editors. Okay, it's going to be number 4. We'll hit enter. Perfect, that loaded it in. And we'll go to create cameras, over to custom DT rig. There we go, and you notice my zero parallax plane is set to 0. So very, very cool settings. I mean, this is a really cool way of getting a lot of stuff done. We're now going to go in and start to do some of our expression work to really get this rig exactly like the one that we built up over that course of time. So we're going to continue working on our Python script and really tie up everything, all of our little loose ends. So we want to add the expression that adjusts the near plane based off the zero parallax, half of the zero parallax. And we're also going to turn on the near plane as well as turn on the frustum. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. So in Maya, let's go ahead and copy and paste some of these settings here. So in my script editor, I'll just go ahead and leave this open. And I'm just going to erase everything. We'll erase the top and the bottom, and let's just see what we have happen here. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to add an expression on this near clip plane. If you remember what we did, we right-click, we went to create new expression, okay, and we took this near clip plane. Okay, we'll click and drag that down, and we said, okay, equals the same thing. So we'll just copy this. Okay, and instead of near clip plane, we actually, let me just make this bigger so it's easier to see. We used 0, capital P parallax. Okay, and we took all that divided by 2. So that was our expression. Okay, so I hit create, and we'll close. And perfect, that's exactly what we want. Now, if we take a look in our script editor, here is the actual code that we are running. So we're telling Maya, okay, take an expression. Here's the string that we want to run. So here's all the stuff inside of here. And O is for object, which is here's where we want, which object we want this to apply to. Okay, so I'm going to copy this expression part right here between the quotes. Okay, so I'll copy that. Now here's the problem. That's for Mel. That's not for Python. So if we go back to our Python commands, and I'll put in expression. Okay, there it is, expression. And we scroll all the way down and look at the example. What this says is we do cmds expression. Okay, that's pretty simple. And we put in s equals and the string. But the problem is we put O equals ball, or O equals the object. We don't put the object inside of Python. Okay, we just use the attribute. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to Maya here. Let's take a look at the script editor. Here we said, all right, here's the name of the camera and its near clip plane. And then we also defined the name of the camera. Well, Python doesn't want that. It doesn't need all of that. We're going to do all of that separately. Okay, so let's take a look at how we're going to do that in our code. Let's come back down to the bottom here where we had these commands, and we're going to hit space a couple of times. So we're going to do 2 spaces, and we'll say cmds.expression parentheses, parentheses. Okay, so if you open the parentheses, close the parentheses. And we're going to say, all right, O equals, our object equals, O equals, it's going to be center cam, just like what we used earlier right here. Okay, and we're going to say, okay, S equals, and we'll paste in our entire expression. Now the problem is we don't need these names. So let's get rid of these names, and we don't need the periods. So we'll just get rid of this, just like that. And I'm going to wrap all of this in a single quote. All right, perfect. So let's test and make sure this works. Okay, we'll do a file, save as. We're not going to do a whole bunch. We're just going to do little bits and save them and test them as we go. So let's delete this camera here. All right, and we'll go up, load the next camera, which is going to be 5. Hit enter. Perfect. And we'll go ahead and create that camera. Awesome. So here's our near clip plane. If I move my 0 parallax, if I move this to, let's say, 500, my near clip plane is automatically set to 250. Perfect. That's exactly what I want. The problem is I can't see it. So let's go and turn on our near clip plane for the center cam. Okay, so there's that. And let's turn on our frustum to our center as well. So by turning both of those on, let's take a look at the code that it generated. Here it is right here. So that is to turn on our near clip display and our frustum. So let's copy both of these here. We'll just work on one at a time here. We'll copy this display near clip, and we'll just set that adder. So just like we did right here where we set the adder, we're going to set this adder. So we'll do cmds.set adder, parentheses, close parentheses. Always, if you open a parentheses, just go ahead and close them. It's just a good practice. And we'll say center cam plus, we're just going to do it just like the one above, single quote, and we'll say paste. Okay, and remember to put in a period, just like we did earlier. There we go. And that's the name of the attribute, so we're going to close the quote. We'll say comma, and which number do we want? Well, it was number 4 if you take a look right here. And that's pretty much just saying the 4th option. So we'll jump back over to Edit Plus. We'll put in a 4, and we're good. So let's go ahead and, while we're here, go ahead and copy this and paste another copy. Remember to space it in. And instead of near display clip, let's jump over and get the display frustrum. Copy that. And let's go back in here and paste. Perfect. So let's take all of this. I'm going to just comment that we added a near clip plane and turned on a few guides. Okay, anything that you type here will not be executed. And it's just so later on when you open this script, you're like, what in the world? Oh, here it is. That's what I used. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do a file, save as, and let's go in and check our handiwork to find out if we have rebuilt this entire rig completely custom. So let's trash what we've got here. Let's go up here to, again, Window, Rendering Editors, Custom Stereo Rig Editor. We're going to load up number 6. Hit Enter. Close this. And moment of truth, let's load this up. There we go. Very, very cool. So here is our custom rig. We now have all of our things turned on. If I adjust my zero parallax, I have all my views. I have everything that I need. And the time that I spent walking through you, teaching you step by step, we now have all of this built in as a preset. So we're good to go. The next thing I'm going to do is create a couple of shelf buttons. And that way you can just click the shelf buttons, pull up these scripts, and we're good to go. And we'll wrap up our training. So the last few pieces of the puzzle here are going to be creating a couple of shelf buttons. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through and manually type in the custom stereo rig Python file, each time that you want to load this. So now that we've got this custom rig and everything is looking really good and working out the way we want it to work, let's take a look at how we get this in. Now, we showed you earlier when we first started playing with this on how to get your files loaded up in here, right? And so to get all these files loaded in correctly, we actually started to use some actual commands. So let's go back into our Python commands, and I'm going to type in stereo. There it is, rig manager. And we're going to go all the way down to the bottom, and if you remember correctly, we selected this part right here and copied it. Okay, this is in the Python examples area. And it's essentially what we want is this registration of new rig types. Okay, so we'll just copy this, and we'll jump back over to Maya, and I'll open up my script editor. Now be aware that this is a Python script, so we'll paste this here in the Python area. Now I don't need these bottom 2 lines, I just need one of these stereo rig manager additions, and we need to give it a name. Okay, so this is going to be called my my stereo rig DT, and the name of my file I'm going to slip in right here where it says hierarchical rig. We're going to put in stereo rig DT, and I believe it's going to be number 6 is the one that we wrapped up. And you could rename that file so you know that this is the production one that you're going to be using. So we still want to keep this. We want to keep this. We don't really care about this default rig information, so we'll just get rid of that. Okay, perfect. So I'll select all of this, and we'll hit enter on the keypad. Perfect, no errors, and that's loaded up beautifully. So let's add this to our shelf. So I'll just go to Display, UI Elements, Shelf, and I'm just going to go in and go to my custom shelf, which should be blank, and I'm just going to middle click and drag and drop this code up here. Okay, this is going to load my script right in here. And to prove that, let's actually save this out as a version 7. Actually, we'll just rename it. So let's do a file, save as, and I'm going to call this Stereo Rig DT Production. Okay, so that's the one we're going to use in production. So hit save. We'll close that down, and I'm going to update my script here. So I'm just going to throw away my shelf icon, and I'm going to remove this 6 and slip in production. And I'm going to leave the name here just fine. Okay, so we'll select all of this, hit enter. We have to rename this name here, so we'll say DT rig for, actually I'll just leave it the same, I'll call it production. Okay, we'll select all, run it, perfect, works good. Now we'll add this to our shelf. So anytime we need to load up our custom rigs, we can hit this button and be good to go. Now we actually want to create the camera itself. And so if I minimize this and go back to wireframe, I still have to go to create, cameras, and come down to our stereo DT production. And there it is. And so let's take a look at the code that ran. Okay, and it actually did a whole bunch of stuff, right? So we want to capture, let me just minimize this a little bit so you can see all the stuff that's going on. We want to capture a lot of this information. So let's erase this top part, and I'll create a new tab. So let me just see here. We'll go to create, command, new tab, and we'll choose Python. So we can slip in our Python camera information here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on echo all commands. All right, so we'll go back up here to create, cameras, stereo rig, DT for production. We'll load all that, and all this crazy stuff happens, all this code. But if we go to the top, what we're looking for is our create stereo rig information. So again, at the top, we're looking for right here, create stereo rig and the name of the rig. So let's take all of this right here where it says from Maya app stereo, import the stereo camera rig. Okay, we'll copy that down here. This is going to be the information that we need to create a new rig. So I'll just move this over, and I'll delete what we've got here. So let me just turn off my echo. Okay, so we don't have any of our rigs here. And I'm going to run this command. So we'll just highlight everything, enter, there we go, perfect. So I'm just going to take this, middle click, and drag it up here to my shelf. So next time I launch Maya and I have a brand new scene, okay, which I'll do right here, we'll create a brand new scene. If I may need to first load my stereo rig, and that's okay, it says I've already got it loaded, no problem. And now I'll create my camera, and there it is. Everything's set up, ready to go. Now these are kind of hard to see. I got to admit, they are kind of hard to see. So if we go into the shelf editor, we can actually edit the names and the images. So for my example, I'm just going to change the image. Now by default, it goes into the icons directory, but I'm going to actually pull up my Maya project files here, and we've provided some shelf icons. So the first one is for load, okay, and the second one we'll set up is the cam, and so we'll save all these shelves, and now you have a couple of icons: load up the stereo cams and load up or install the cam itself. So again, just it's totally optional. These last few lessons are completely optional. I just want to show you how you could put this inside of use in production and really save yourself a whole bunch of time when it comes to recreating these rigs over and over and over when you're trying to use these expressions and basic setups. So now that you've got your images rendered, let's talk about a couple of different ways of compositing those back together to see your final effect. So I'm going to start with Photoshop, and we're just going to create this image with 2 stills, okay? So knowing that with CS3 and CS4, you can go ahead and import sequences. You can also do this exact same thing on a sequence, but I'm just going to do them on single images. All right, I've got the right channel, and I've got the left channel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything on the left channel, and I'm going to copy it. So Control-C. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. So File, New, or Control-N. I'm going to call this stereo. All right, and you'll notice that whatever you copied, it'll remember the height and width. So I'm using 640 by 480. All right, there we go. So here's our stereo document. I'm just going to hit paste, Control-V. All right, so that pasted in all the pixels that we just copied, and I'm going to rename this one left. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close left. and now we've got right. So I'm going to select all the pixels in right, Control C, close that image, and paste in right. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. So what we want to do is extract certain bits of data from the left channel and the right channel to then use to composite this back together. Now, I've got the left on top and the right on the bottom. That's the way I like to work. Let's throw this background away. We don't need that. You can switch it however you want, whatever your pipeline or workflow is, but I just prefer this method. So left on top, right on the bottom. All right, so what I want to do is on the left channel, if I go to channels, I only want to see the green and the blue. I want to get rid of these, okay? And so what you end up with is just red. So how do we get that? Well, we're not going to remove those channels. What we're going to do is set the channels. So we're going to set the green and the blue to 0. So on the left-hand side here, what I'm going to do is go up here to either my adjustments and choose Channel Mixer, or you can go to this little icon right here and go to Channel Mixer. Okay, and that'll bring up this Channel Mixer icon. So what we want to do is leave red alone. That's fine. We're going to go to green and set this green to 0. And then we're going to go to blue, and we're going to set the blue to 0. So what we are left with is this red information, and all we've really done is taken the red channel and put it inside of the green and the blue. So all the channels are red. All right. So that's left. Let's go down to right. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. We're going to add a channel mixer. And what's easy to remember about the right channel is you just want to, on the right, remove red. So all R's. Right, remove red. And so we'll say, okay, on this red, we'll remove it to 0. Notice I'm on the red channel right here. And now I'll have a cyan. So I've got the right channel, which is cyan, the left, which is red, and now I need to combine these together. The only problem is if I take this left and I change it from normal to linear dodge and add, and I turn on my top, I don't get my effect. And the reason I don't get the effect is that this channel mixer is going all the way down through all of the images. And so it's overriding everything that's happening. So what I want to do is have just this adjustment layer affect just this layer. And to do that, we're going to use something called a clipping path. So holding down Alt, you'll notice that as I move my mouse closer to where these two layers connect, I'll get this clipping mask icon, or clipping path icon. So I'll click that once. All right, so what I've done is I've clipped this adjustment layer directly to just the pixels on this layer, and that's it. And by doing that, we automatically see our anaglyphic experience here, or anaglyphic final image. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to this bottom one, this bottom set, just to keep things organized. And I'm going to rename this. So my top one I'm going to call the left extract. And the bottom one, I'm going to call the right. Now, we're not really extracting any data. What we are doing, though, is resetting the channels and pulling out that right data. So without doing this step, we wouldn't see it. So I don't mind calling it left extract and right extract. Now, the only problem here is if we want to color correct. Let's say we want this, let's turn this off here. The shirt to be more of an orange, his skin tone to be more of human skin, the walls to be a little bit bluer, and the liquid to be a little bit greener. We're going to need to add some color correction here. So more than likely, you'll probably start with a hue saturation, and we'll shift the hues. So let's just go in here, and we'll just shift this. 21 looks pretty good, so let's say we want to shift this to 21. Okay, and we'll go ahead and turn these off and look. All right, that looks good. Skin tone looks nice, orange shirt, blue background, and a green liquid. The only problem with this is that when I turn on my anaglyphic effect, it's going to be really broken. And it's because my anaglyph has turned from red and cyan to orange and baby blue. And so that's not good. That's not what we want. Okay, so let's throw this hue saturation away. What we want to do is actually color correct all of these before we put this channel mixer on. So to do that, what we're going to do is convert the left and right images into smart objects. So this is going to work with any of the CS, I believe 2, 3, and 4 that allowed you to do this. So we're just going to right-click, convert to smart object. Go down here, right-click, convert to smart object. I did that to both the right and the left images. And now, if I want to add that color correction, all I need to do is open up both the left and the right and add their color correction to it. So I'll open up the left by double-clicking on the icon. It's going to say, all right, just make sure you hit save before you come back into this document. No problem. We'll go ahead and add our hue saturation, and we had it up around 21, so that looked pretty cool. So I'm going to save this and close it, and then I'll go into the right image. No problem. Give it a second. We'll go ahead and add a hue saturation here as well, and I'm just going to put in the exact same number. Alright, so now when I hit save and close, in here I actually have the updated documents. So here is my right extract, and here is my left extract, and what I've got is all of the information that I need to create an anaglyph effect with color correction. So really there's a lot of workflows that you can do. I'm going to go ahead and just tuck these away into a folder, and I'll call this my right. And then I'll tuck the top 2 into a folder. And now, when I hand this off to another artist, they can quickly go in, double-click with any of the information that they need to gather, and composite our images back together. So that's just a quick look at not only putting the images together, but also using a nice standardized workflow to keep your scene organized so you can hand this off or open it up later and still remember what you were doing. So now that we've created a sequence of images out of Maya, let's talk about how to put those image sequences back together inside of a product like After Effects. So in After Effects, we're going to take a sequence of images. And I've already re-rendered those for you, or pre-rendered those for you. And that's going to be in the After Effects directory of your project files. If you open it, I'll have an Assets directory. And then I have either static images that you could use, which is just one frame, or you could use the animated sequence, which is one for the left and one for the right. So we'll go ahead and double-click here to load these in. I'll go ahead and load in my left. If it asks you what you want to do with the alpha channel, we're just going to say ignore, mainly because we're not using an alpha channel in this image. And we'll go over to the right and load that in as well and ignore. Okay, so here's my left and my right cameras. What I'm going to do is quickly create a brand new comp, throw both of them in there, and set the channels, and we'll be on with life. So let's just go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and drag this down to our new comp window. There we go. And I'm going to rename this Messy Stereo. Okay, and it's mainly because it's not going to be the best we could do. All right, so let's just see what the name of this is. Here's our right. On top of that, I'm going to add our left. So there's our left. Okay, and I'm going to add a couple of filters here to make this work. So for this object, or the top layer, the left layer, let's go in and we'll go to Effect, Channel, Set Channels. And by using Set Channels, what we're going to do is say, all right, right now the red is set to red, the green is set to green, and the blue is set to blue. Since this is the left channel, what we're going to do is remove the blue, so we'll set that to off. And then we'll go up here to green, and we'll set that to off. And that'll result in a red image. Perfect. So now on the second layer, on the right layer, remember on the R's, right remove red. So we'll go to Channel, Set Channels, and on the red, we'll turn it off. There we go. So now that we have this created, what we're going to do is set a blend mode. So we'll go ahead and activate our toggle switches here and set this from normal to add on our top layer. All right, we'll turn that on, and there is our quick and dirty anaglyphic experience, right? Our anaglyphic final output. The problem is, what if I want to color correct this? Well, it's going to be hard to visualize without turning lots of things on and off, on and off, on and off. And so what I'm going to do is recreate this in another lesson, but this time I'm going to show you a much cleaner workflow so you can assemble this together in a nice, organized manner that you can hand this over to somebody else. So now that we've got our initial render put together in After Effects, let's talk about a better pipeline for assembly of this image. And what I want to do is create an After Effects comp that's a little bit more intuitive and a little bit easier to control. Because right now, if I want to color correct this, it's going to be a nightmare. So let's throw away this messy stereo, and I'm just opened up lesson 19 if you want to follow along. And what I have now is just the left and the right sequences. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a comp for each of these. So I'll just click this and drag this down, and I'll rename this left. Okay, and I'll do the same with the right. I'll go ahead and click and drag that down and rename this right. Oops, we got the wrong layer named here. Let me get that again. Right. Okay, and so for the original sequence, I'm going to just drag those into the folder and call this assets. All right, so I have my left and I have my right. And what I'm going to do is drag one of these down and create a new comp, and this comp I'm going to rename to stereo. Okay, so stereo is going to be composed of left and right. So there's my left and my right. And now the left and right comps, I'm going to actually put my set channels. So channel, set channels. Okay, so my left, remember we turn off the green and the blue. So you end up with a red. Okay, and on the right, remember it's right remove red. So all R's. So we'll go to channel, set channels, and then take the red and turn it off. So we get cyan. Perfect. So now all I need to do is turn on the left and set a blend mode. So the blend mode will be add. So we'll switch this from normal to add. Okay? No different except we just added one more comp. Now, what I'm going to do is show you how to do color correction, but do this without adjusting each of these and messing up the effect. So I'm going to open up the left. Okay, we'll start here. I'll go in and add a layer, new adjustment layer. Okay, and I'll rename this to, and I'll call this color corrections. All right. And on this color correction, I'm going to add an effect, and we'll just start with something like a hue saturation. And just like what we did in the Photoshop lesson, I think 21 looked pretty good. Nice. So we got nice green liquid, orange t-shirt, nice skin tones. Everything looks really nice. So the problem here is, okay, I've got this color correction here. Now I have to put it on the right so you can see the difference. And what I don't want to do is copy this and paste it, because now I have to remember to go color correct two things. So instead what I'm going to do is take this adjustment layer and pre-compose it. So I'll press Control Shift C, and that will pre-comp the entire comp. And I'll just change this to Move All Attributes, and I'll call this my color correction comp. Okay, we'll say OK. And the problem is the color correction went away. So it's just like if I didn't even have it. So what I now need to do is say, okay, actually I want you to collapse all the transformations and have all of your effects affect everything in this comp. So I'll just press the little button right here. It looks like a little wheel, so we'll click that once. So you notice here's before and here's after. Now my color correction works. So what's awesome is in the right channel, all I need to do is go in to my color correction comp and add that to my right channel. Okay, and go ahead and turn on its collapse transformations. Perfect. So what does this do for me? Well, let's go to color correction comp. Okay, there it is. And I'll go to my effects over here, and I'm just going to lock this down. Okay, and if you want, you could do a number of things here. There's a great layer called guide layers. I want to thank Chris for showing me this. What I'm going to do is just select my text tool, and I'll just come in and drag a little box. Okay, and I'll put in some information. So I'll just put in here, set the color for the skin and overall tone, and you could put any other, instruction that you want. Okay. The problem is when I go back to my stereo, it's going to be over my image, and that's not cool. I don't want that. So let's just clean up our workspace here. This is not good. So in my color correction comp, all I need to do is right-click on this comp and choose Guide Layer. Now, if you choose Guide Layer, what happens is it gets this little icon right here, okay? And even though you can see this, when you go to your other comps where it's used, you won't see it. It's invisible. But you will see it when you open that comp. So this can be great for setting instructions and saying, hey, this is where you want to make any of these color adjustments. You may want to put in here, I'll just show you. We'll just say lock the we'll just say lock the effects window down. Perfect. All right, so those are the instructions that I want the next artist to use when they open this. And what we could do is say, okay, cool, open this comp color correction. All right, I'll go ahead and lock right up here. If you take a look, we'll lock this down. Lock it right there. And now when I go into my stereo, I can actually go in here and tweak this a little bit more if I want. And say, well, no, let's see. Maybe 10. 10's what looks really good. And what's happening is that comp is being put into the left and the right and then being combined inside the stereo. And the whole point is I've locked down the setting and now I can make any of those adjustments and be good to go. So this again will help your final output. And really what you'd want to do is render this left and right. So if you want to project this using real 3D or polarized projection, you would render out the left and the right after you've done all your color corrections. However, if you want to render out your anaglyphic, just go to the stereo and render that. So yes, this was a number of steps greater than the ones that we did in the previous After Effects lesson, but what you're going to end up with is a really, really good workflow. Again, you would want to go through and put things away that you would, not want to mess with, and that way all you're left with is something that says, stereo render comp, and that way they know that's the one that you want to take, render, and be good with it. So hopefully this will give you a great jump start into the process of how to recomp these images back in After Effects. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of stereoscopic 3D in Maya. We've covered a ton of ground, and now you've learned all the tools and techniques needed to start putting stereo rendering into place. We've also covered a complete understanding of stereoscopy and how to properly set up camera rigs to create high-quality renders. I also want to take a second to thank Chris here at Digital Tutors, who did an amazing job researching the material in this training. If you're wanting to learn more about stereoscopic 3D, you might want to take a look at our stereoscopic 3D in After Effects, where we cover the full process of manually creating stereo camera systems inside of After Effects. I'd like to thank you for going through this training with me, and I'm excited to see how you're going to use this training in your own projects. To continue your education and expand your skill set, I encourage you to visit us online where you'll find all of the latest announcements for our new training. Built on educational values, Digital Tutors started with a simple vision in mind. All we wanted to do was help new and experienced artists become more productive, and we were going to do that by helping you learn new software and production techniques faster. We've been a leading online resource for free video-based training and have been instrumental in aiding millions of artists on a daily basis. If you want to learn more about the multitude of training solutions we have in various areas of the production pipeline, check us out at digitaltutors.com.